Tu teléfono viejo o roto puede hacerte quedar mal.
Genial.
Pero en Verizon puedes intercambiar cualquier teléfono viejo de nuestras mejores marcas. Aprovecha al máximo y llévate el increíble iPhone 16 Pro con una línea nueva en My Plan. Ahora en nuestros planes más bajos. Además, un iPad y un Apple Watch Series 10. Es como 3 regalos inesperados y los puedes obtener con cualquier plan. Visita tu tienda Verizon hoy. Se aplican términos adicionales. El Apple Watch y el iPad requieren un plan de servicio.
Hey, Prime members, are you tired of ads interfering with your favorite podcasts? Good news! With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts, included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free, or go to amazon.com/ad-free podcasts. That's amazon.com/ad-free podcasts to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Welcome to mini episode number 423 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And I have 3 spooky stories for you today, and the last story comes from the 19th of November 2024. And story number 1 comes from Hannah. I grew up sensitive to things. Not that I realised this when I first experienced something that I consider to be paranormal, and have been told by a medium that I have a very strong and sensitive aura. Although this isn't about those times, but a time when I think I was 23 or 24. It first occurred when I went to look around a venue that would eventually turn out to be my next place of work. It was an old Georgian country house, beautiful from the outside and warm and inviting on the inside. However, there were a few spots that didn't feel as warm and inviting as you'd hope. The first time I experienced something was when I was looking around. I went along what was known as the West Corridor, where the ladies' toilets were, and felt as though something was around me. I went in to use the bathroom, using the second stall, and felt as though there was someone standing right outside waiting for me. As I went to wash my hands, I sensed someone sitting on the sofa in the bathroom just watching me. It felt friendly enough, but it did make me feel a little uneasy. I asked the manager if the place had any haunted stories, and she asked me where I had felt something. I replied that it was the West Wing bathroom, to which she replied and said yes, that was the spot that people have seen a lady walking around. She asked me if there were any other areas that I felt anything, to which I replied the top floor and the East Wing that was once the servants' quarters. She told me that both of those areas were places that past workers had felt or seen something. Once I began working at the house, I kept sensing this person in the bathroom every time that I went, and I would soon avoid going to that bathroom after it got dark. My job involved working late sometimes, and sometimes alone I would have to close up the house. I didn't mind doing this apart from when I got to the top floor of the main house or the East Wing. I would quickly walk along the servants' stairs to the East Wing and close off the rooms as quickly as possible, peeking my head in to ensure that all the lights were turned off. However, when I got to the top floor of the house, that is when I started to be filled with dread, and my anxiety would race. I would run through rooms as quickly as possible, shutting off the lights, closing any curtains or shutters, and locking the rooms. One night at around 7 p.m. after we had done our last viewing, I had asked one of the members of the team to lock all the upstairs before they left, but they hadn't gotten around to it. So I dragged myself up the stairs to close the top floor off. It consisted of 6 rooms, some with interconnecting doors. As I did the first one near the service lift, that happened to be a nanny's room in the past, I felt very uneasy, but went in as normal, closed off the lights and locked the door. Feeling a presence around me, I hesitated before going into the next room. This room was dark, with floral wallpaper and 2 twin beds, and connected to another room that had an armoire that's doors would always open as you walked into the room. I twisted the doorknob and took the key out of the door as I thought, I'll lock this one on the way out. I went in and turned off the lamp and walked towards the door with my phone torch on. I tried to twist the door handle, but it wouldn't turn. It was then that I realised that I was locked in. I kept trying to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. I felt the room getting darker and sensed a very unfriendly presence in the room with me. I turned around as fast as I could and headed towards the interconnected doors that were both locked. Just as I got to the doors, they both swung open in opposite directions before I could even attempt to open them. I bolted through them as fast as I could, saying thank you to whatever opened them for me. I rushed around the last few bedrooms and ran back down to the office as fast as I could, trying to understand what had just happened. I felt a feeling of dread when I was in that room, that I couldn't shake, like something was trying to scare me. It's safe to say that that was the last time I ever went into either of those rooms by myself ever again, let alone late at night. As I left the house for the night, I looked up at the room where I was locked into, and I swear I saw a shadow figure looking out at me. I drove home in a complete panic, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A few months later, we had a medium and a paranormal team come and investigate the house. They asked the team if they had felt anything, and of course some are sceptical. Some haven't had any experiences, and some have no clue what they felt or saw, much like me. However, I did tell them about my experience in the top room of the house. When one of the team went into the room with us and her group, she confirmed to me that there was something there. And whatever it was not a nice presence, and she didn't want to communicate with it. I'm just happy that some other force or presence helped me to get out of the room that day. I continued to feel things the entire time I worked there, and have had a few feelings since. However, since having my child, I've been less open to allowing those feelings, as I feel very protective of not letting anything near my family or home. I even cleanse the house and my child's room to make sure that we are protected. I wonder if that happens to a lot of people. If I just said that completely out of context. Right, let me reframe that. I wonder if a lot of people who have strong intuition or psychic abilities don't realise what they have until later in life. Because when you're a child, you just are. Like, the way you are is just the way you are. So I wonder, do lots of people kind of not realise that what they are experiencing is, spiritual or deeply intuitive or whatever, and then they don't realise it until later life? And I've got to say it, right? I know that, it's obviously deeply unpleasant to have uneasy feelings in specific areas of houses, and like Hannah, obviously that intuition in you is really strong, that you immediately were like, I felt like I was being watched here, and the person doing the tour was like, oh yeah, that's where people report seeing this thing, this lady, right? I know that that's obviously indicative of your deep intuition, right? But also, please, from the afterlife, stop watching people while they're in the bathroom. Again, like if somebody's in the bathroom, I would steer clear, because you're going to get a reputation as being like a pervert ghost. So maybe don't do that. Unless somebody is in that bathroom and they explicitly say, any ghosts in here, I give you consent to watch me, I'm into that kind of thing, I'm cool with it, then just don't do it. Just stay away. And I really felt the cold and the panic of being trapped in that room in the dark. And I will always say that I am pretty cool with being anywhere haunted. Like, there's places that I'd love to check out, there's some places that'd be more uneasy, but as long as I can get out, I'm fine. As long as I know there's an escape route, I will be fine. I will not be too scared, right? If I'm in a room and I get locked into it, I'm going to lose my mind. And it sounds like you remained really calm and cool and collected, which I would not have. And I think it's probably a good idea in general to protect your little one from unwanted spiritual energy. That sounds like it probably makes sense in your situation. And story number 2 comes from Chae. I know people are always skeptical about sleep paralysis stories, but bear with me. I never had experienced an episode prior to this incident. Last year, I was pregnant with my first child. As most women experience, I had a very difficult time getting comfortable at night, but I was finally able to nod off. I can't remember what I was dreaming about, but I know that it was pleasant. Until my dreaming suddenly changed into me being very aware of my body and the room around me. I was laying in bed on my back, which I'm told is a no-no when pregnant. I always made myself sleep on my side, and never really had been a back sleeper anyway. But nope. There I was, flat on my back and unable to move. I became aware that something was in the room that wasn't supposed to be. I couldn't see the floor by the doorway, but I knew something had crawled into the bedroom and was slowly creeping towards my side of the bed. I began to panic for obvious reasons. This unseen thing put a hand on the bed right next to my arm to pull itself up onto the bed. When it was fully sitting on the bed next to me, I felt a pressure on my chest, as though it was leaning on me. I couldn't see it, but I knew in my head what was happening. It slowly moved its hand towards me and began to shove its fingers into my mouth. I felt it. Clear as day, I felt its fingers shoving into my mouth. They were thick, dry and grey. They smelled like a rotting animal you would see on the side of the road. They were also big. Too big. He could only fit 2 into my mouth. I was fully panicking now, trying to focus on moving my body, screaming, doing anything I could to get this thing's fingers out of my mouth, but I couldn't. I don't know how long this was happening, but I was finally snapped out of it and the unseen horror disappeared when my husband shook me roughly and screamed at me to wake up. I was hyperventilating, and since I could finally move my body, I jolted up in bed and flung myself away from the edge of the bed. Once I'd calmed down, my husband explained that he could hear my screaming, but it was muffled somehow, almost like I was choking. I'd also managed to scream help, but again it was muffled. For me, the most terrifying part of this horrific episode is when I snapped out of it. I had a very vivid realisation. It wanted my son. I think there's a reality with sleep paralysis stories, and that reality is that, some people are like, oh, it's just sleep paralysis, so, it doesn't matter. But it's like Richard Wiseman says in his book Paranormality. Something happened to this person, and it is something that is truly terrifying, and it irrevocably changes that person. So therefore, they have had a paranormal experience, I can't even imagine what this would be like to wake up and think this thing, this monstrous thing, is trying to get to my baby in this moment. And that is the belief. You're not lying there going, oh, I'm having sleep paralysis, it'll be fine. I'm not freaked by the fact that this monster has its fingers in my mouth. Oh, hideous. And for your reaction to be so visceral that you can physically feel it, you can smell it. Like that when you wake up, you're not going to go, oh, no, it's fine, that was just sleep paralysis. I would be freaked. I would be absolutely terrified. And I can understand. I know that you went on to say later in your email that you struggled to sleep for the rest of your pregnancy because of it. Absolutely, because you'd be thinking, if I go to sleep, this is going to fucking happen again. I just think sleep paralysis is utterly petrifying. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. There's a documentary on, I think you can get it like freely on YouTube, called The Nightmare. That's all about sleep paralysis. And it poses questions about sleep paralysis and how much of sleep paralysis is based in the brain and how much of it is based in paranormal stuff. And it's weird. It's freaky. It really scared me. So if you're a sleep paralysis sufferer, I would recommend only watching that documentary if you are feeling very strong and very able.
Picture this, you're halfway through a DIY car fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realise you're missing a part. It's okay, because whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything, brakes, headlights, cold air intakes, whatever you need, and it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love.
Hi folks, it's Mark from the podcast Food with Mark Bittman. As the weather gets warmer, it's time for lighter meals, and Whole Foods Market has just what you're looking for, with great everyday prices. Look for the yellow, low price signs that help you save money without compromising the quality you expect. Nothing, absolutely nothing in the store has any high fructose corn syrup, for example. Just shop with confidence. Save on the best of spring with great everyday prices at Whole Foods Market.
Will full coverage make me look cakey? Is my undertone neutral or is it cool? We get it. Finding the right foundation is hard. But with Il Makiage, it's easy to find your perfect match online. Customized for your unique skin tone and coverage needs. Plus, with Try Before You Buy, you can try your full size at home for 14 days. With over 600,000 five-star reviews, this best-selling foundation is going viral for a reason. Take the Power Match quiz now at ilmakiage.com/quiz. ILMAKIAGE.com/quiz.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
And our final story today comes from Laura. I'm slowly working my way through real life ghost stories and have just listened to Tiny Tales, episode 214, which was during 31 Days of Terror 2023. It's a Patreon episode, so not everyone would have heard it, but you read out a frankly horrific story about a ventriloquist dummy in the fridge, and an easier one to listen to about teaspoons that went missing and then reappeared. And you asked if anyone had any stories relating to that. I grew up in Canterbury, and still work there a couple of days a week presently, though I now live in Folkestone, about 20 miles away. Now I work for an independently run children's shop, which has a shop in Canterbury and in Folkestone, which I love, and I'm pretty sure the building, though very old, isn't haunted. 10 years ago, when I was still living in Canterbury, I got a job as a bar supervisor in a pub in Canterbury city centre called the Shakespeare, which is a very old building with a fascinating history, but doesn't have nearly as long a history as some others in the city, one of which boasts origins in the 14th century and having been built on Roman remains. I did work in that one too. That's called the Parrot and has been mentioned on this podcast before. I won't go off on a tangent about that other pub too much, but I will say that the staff had a rule that when you stood on the street locking the pub door late at night before you go home, you never look up at the dark windows upstairs. If you see someone up there, it's your responsibility to go in and check that there's not an intruder or a patron left inside. And you would always feel watched when locking that door, so you feel tempted to look, but you just don't look. I know that sounds like we would just flippantly ignore someone who had been locked in the building, but we had a strict close-down procedure in every pub I've worked in, which involved the insensitively named dead man check, where we would check the whole building for anyone left. You can imagine the commodity of stock a pub or a bar would hold, so this was always a firm rule lest you return in the morning to the place robbed dry and the fire exit door hanging open. So the pub was definitely empty of people, but we were somehow watched from those windows while leaving. Back to the Shakespeare. The pub had been called Casey's before 2013 and had been an Irish pub with a free jukebox and a sticky floor. It was a grunge pub and was one of my favourite pubs in town when I was a teenager, young person living there. It had live music, cheap drinks, and was always loud and buzzing. There were lots of grunge pubs in Canterbury in the early 2000s. Me and my friends were spoilt for choice. Most have now turned into trendy restaurant pubs, the Shakespeare included. The Shakespeare sits on Butchery Lane, a side street off the main high street and very near the cathedral gate. And while I was in the courtyard sweeping up fag butts, cigarette ends, it's not as offensive as it sounds, I would eavesdrop on the many history walking tours that would walk past and stop by our courtyard. According to the tour leaders, the road used to run with blood from the abattoir that was on the street a couple of 100 years ago, hence the name Butchery Lane. A bit of history on the pub. Before Casey's became Casey's, sometime in the 1980s, it was a pub called the Shakespeare. It was reverted back to its original name in 2013 when the new owners took it over from the Irish landlords. And apparently the reason why it was originally named the Shakespeare was because before it was a pub, it was a playhouse, and it was one of the few in the country that survived Oliver Cromwell's annihilation of culture by closing the majority of playhouses and theatres across the country. William Shakespeare has no links to Canterbury as far as I'm aware though. Apparently when it was a playhouse, there was a brothel upstairs. I don't know if this is true or a rumour. I think most buildings in Canterbury claim to once have been a brothel. Around the doorway, which was allegedly the entrance, there was always a heavy and thick negative atmosphere. Though I think a lot of priming was going on there. So that's the backstory of the pub and the area that it's in. This is all word of mouth history, so please don't shoot me if it's wrong. I'm not going to go into detail of some of the strange things that happened in the pub, as I don't believe they were paranormal. It could be easy to assume that they were, but I think pubs are similar to schools in that they are buildings which are full of life and noise, and then when they are empty, they feel very different. My sceptical brain struggles with what happened on this night, though. And you'll know this is true because it's so very, very mundane. In summer, we would want the doors open in order to get a through draft through the pub. There was no aircon, as that's pretty rare unless you're a modern office or a hotel in the UK. And the buildings were built to keep the heat in. So in summer, it can get pretty uncomfortable. The door that leads to the staircase that leads up to the creepy toilets automatically swings closed. So there is a magnet that screws onto the bottom of the door, and when you open the door fully, the magnet attaches to an attracting magnet on the wall holding the door open. During the winter months, and the spring and autumn too, due to it never being hot enough, we would unscrew the magnet from the door so it would never be held open and would always swing shut. There was a back door that led out to the courtyard on the other side of the door with the magnet, at the foot of the staircase. Smokers would inevitably leave the back door open when returning indoors, and so the whole pub would get cold if the inner door was open. So we'd completely remove the magnet to prevent this from happening. This magnet was heavy. I would compare it to the weight of a standard bag of flour, roughly. It was the size of the palm of my hand, excluding fingers, and was round and about 2 inches thick, solid metal. We had a place that we always kept the magnet during the majority of the year, and it was always kept on the shelf by the coffee machine. It was around Easter, and it had been hot. Easter sticks in my mind as an unpredictable time for weather in the UK. Some years it has snowed, and some years it's hot. I went to get the magnet, but it wasn't by the coffee machine. I asked all the staff. No one had seen it or knew of its whereabouts. The chef who knew everything didn't know where it was, and it had obviously been a really long time since it had last been used, maybe 8 months. A mystery. We used something to prop open the door, but it wasn't ideal as it was a trip hazard, so we continued to look for it every day. One night after locking up, my colleague and I decided we deserved a drink after a particularly busy and tiring shift. So we shut off all the lights apart from a couple of lamps above the bar. We got an ashtray and a drink each, and we're talking about, I don't remember what. Before I say the next bit, I have to clarify that the fire alarm in the building is not a smoke alarm but a heat sensor. We would often have lock-ins and 20 people would be smoking inside and would not trigger the fire alarm to go off. So the two of us smoking a couple of rollies should have had zero effect. 2 things happened within a split second of one another. First, there was a giant thud from behind us, near the door that leads to the staircase. The door that was missing the magnet. A really, really loud thud, like something very heavy being dropped from a height onto a wooden floor. We reeled around in our seats, and then the whole building started ringing out the fire alarm. Panic shot through me, and I ran through the door and up the stairs to the fire control panel and disabled it, worried about the sound waking neighbours as it was close to 3 a.m. I then immediately got a call from the pub owner to my mobile asking what the fuck was going on and why I was still in the building at that time. He obviously gets alerted directly when the alarms go off. I got a bollocking from my boss and had to go back shamefaced to my colleague and say, "Come on, we've got to go, I'm in trouble now." We were just putting away our glasses and gathering our bits when he said to me, "Hold on, before the fire alarm went off there was that thud, what was it?" In the panic we'd forgotten all about it. It came from over there. We both walked to the door that I had just run through 5 minutes previously. And there on the floor was the magnet, just lying there. There were no shelves near it that could have fallen off, and judging by the sound it made, it must have been dropped from a fair height. Another point to add is that right next to the door is the fire alarm button. After we got over the shock and we were back in the building in the daylight, me and my colleague joked that it was like someone had gone, "There's your bloody magnet, now fuck off out of my building," and pressed the alarm. That was 10 years ago, and I still try and rationalise it, but I just don't know how it happened. And the coincidence of both things happening simultaneously. So there we have it. The magnet was lost and then returned in bizarre circumstances. Maybe us smoking had set off the fire alarm when previously smoking hadn't set it off. I'm willing to accept that. even though it's strange. What I struggle with is the coincidence and the timing. And also, where was the magnet? Like you said, Emma, where do these things go when they're missing? Oh, I loved this story so much. First of all, the parrot is one of my locals, and the Shakespeare is also somewhere that I have frequented regularly over the years. And I can imagine, I can see exactly, I know exactly where you're talking about in the Shakespeare pub. And for the listener listening, there is nowhere that a magnet could have been hidden in that area. So what Laura's saying is there's no shelves, there's no like ledges, there aren't. It is just a corridor, or not even a corridor, it's just a stairs up to what is admittedly, yes, a very creepy bathroom. But there's nowhere for the magnet to be hiding. Do you know what I mean? There's nowhere that it could have been around the place. And there's definitely nowhere that it could have fallen from a height. And this is always my question, like when stuff goes missing into the ether, like when all my forks went missing that time, if you know, you know. But where do they go? Where are they in the cosmos? Like, is there a place where things that go missing, like a room of requirement, that they all disappear to? Or are they just floating around somewhere else? It's like that thing, you know, when you hear in poltergeist stories where an object was downstairs and then suddenly it was upstairs. Like, does it apparate? Does it like crack out of existence downstairs and then appear upstairs? Or does it literally float up the stairs? I just want to know. I need to know. And in terms of upstairs in the Shakespeare at one point being a brothel, I do feel like I remember being shown something on the building outside the Shakespeare that demonstrated back in the day that it was a brothel. So I do think it may have been a brothel, you know, but I also see your point that pretty much every building in Canterbury seems to have been a brothel at some point. But back to the magnet and the fire alarm, I totally see what you're saying. It's such a weird, for both those things to happen at the same time. I don't think it was the smoking that set off the fire alarm. Like, if you've had people there for lock-ins, you know, 20 people smoking fags inside and nobody's set off the fire alarm, like a couple of you smoking rollies at the bar isn't going to set off the fire alarm, especially if it's heat activated. Like, I think the whole thing is weird. I think that something was like, here's your magnet, now get out. I agree. How weird. I'm going to be thinking about that now every time I'm in the Shakespeare. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you to Hannah, Chae and Laura for sending in your stories. Remember, the last story came from the 19th of November 2024. And if you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.